Rama Rama Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachanam pangam langyate girim yatkripatmam vande Shri Gurudinataranam Paramanandam Madhavam. Hare Krishna, thank you for joining. So we are in the concluding verses of the 20th chapter. And this section essentially is a conversation between the super soul and so who is basically called Avidya or the unknown, and Vedarbi, who is essentially Puranjan reborn. And essentially the allegory over here is a conversation between the super soul and a soul that is progressing on the path of bhakti, more than progressing and mature on the path of bhakti. So in the 62nd verse, the theme of the conversation is that the super soul is describing his own relationship with the jiva, how he is the well-wisher, how he is neutral, how he is the constant companion. And in the concluding section, he indicates how he is the same but different. Right? So in the verse 62, he talked about the similarity. That he said that you and I we are the same. We are both pure spiritual identities. So essentially, both are both pure spirit souls. Now he will talk about the difference in verse 63. Yatha purusha atmanam ekam adarsha chakshusha dviva bhutam aveksheta tathevantaram avyaho.
Yes. As a person sees the reflection of his body in a mirror to be one with himself and not different, whereas others actually see two bodies. So in our material condition, in which the living being is affected and yet not affected, there is a difference between God and the living being.
So the previous verse spoke about the similarity. This verse speaks about the difference. So the analogy that is used to explain the difference, Vishwanath Chakravarti expands on it, is that one can see one's reflection in the mirror, or one can see the reflection in the eye of another person. So the reflection that is there in the mirror, it is clear. The reflection in the eye is distorted. So essentially, one form becomes two because of contamination. Similarly, the Lord in the original form and the Lord is the original form. So the Lord, he never is subject to any contamination, but the jiva is the distorted form, subject to contamination. Right? So if you step back, previously Paramatma said that you and I are the same. Right? Now he's saying that there are some exceptions. That just like a person gets reflected clearly in the mirror, but with distortion in the eye, and the difference between the two is that in the eye there is contamination. The mirror is clear, plain, the eye is curved, so there is distortion. So similarly, I can never be contaminated, but the jiva can get contaminated. So essentially, the difference that is bringing forth is that the Lord is infallible and the jiva is fallible. Right? So Vishnu Chakravarti has a nice purport for both he's summarizing the previous two verses. Right? So again, and I think that is his style, that he tries to present it as a conversation. So when the super soul says that you and I are the same, then the jiva responds that is intolerable. I cannot accept the fact that I can be the same as my worshipable Lord. So then the Lord says that please do not be angry. Just try to understand that the jiva, though is the same entity in liberation or in bondage, he sees himself as two different entities. In liberation, he sees himself as if in a mirror, and in bondage, he sees himself as if in the eye. So here Vishnu Chakravarti is giving another explanation of the analogy. So he's talking about the reflection of the jiva in the mirror and the eye as the difference between a jiva who is liberated and not liberated. So then he says that just as one form becomes two different forms by being uncontaminated or contaminated, so one should similarly see the difference between the Paramatma and the Jiva. Right? So the difference between the two forms is, one form is contaminated, the other is uncontaminated. Similarly, the difference between the Paramatma and the Jiva is that the Jiva is subject to being contaminated, the Paramatma can never be contaminated. Then Chakravarti Pad continues saying that I exist in the body as Paramatma and you exist as Jiva. By nature, I have no covering, and by my will enter all the bodies in the form of the super soul. So now he's talking about other differences, that the Paramatma never accepts a material body. Even if it appears to be a material body, it is a spiritual body. So that's why he says that by nature I have no covering. But you, when the jiva is conditioned, then it enters into a material body. Right? So second difference. Third difference he says is that I enter on my own will. So when the Lord descends, or when as Paramatma he enters into the body, it is by his will. The jiva is forced by the cycle of karma. So that's the third difference. Right? So three differences so far. Then he says that as a jiva, you are small in size with very little brightness and always influenced by covering. So the fourth difference is that the jiva is infinitesimal and the Lord is infinite. Right? So then he goes ahead to say that you should understand that we are different at all times. It has been said that aham bhavan na chanya, that you and I are not different. I am conscious, you are also conscious. Right? So then he's also talking about the similarity, that the Lord is sentient, the jiva is sentient. The Lord is an eternal spiritual entity, the jiva is also eternal spiritual entity. The Lord is an individual, the jiva is an individual. So there are these similarities and there are also these differences. So both of them are being presented. Then Chakravarti Pad concludes by saying that the demons can take another meaning of these two verses of the Bhagavatam. So my understanding is that these two verses are misinterpreted by the Mayavadis to indicate the oneness. So that's why he says the demons can take another meaning of these two verses. And then he gives this this analogy that after the churning of the ocean, Mohini Murti she sat the demigods and the demons right across one another, and she was between them, appearing as if neutral. But she gave the devas the nectar, the amritam. For the asuras, she gave the poison of unfulfilled expectation. Same personality. So Chakravarti Pal says that's how the Vedas are. That they are sitting as if neutral. But to the devotees, they serve nectar, and to the non-devotees, they serve poison. So he concludes by saying that what the Mayavadis do is wrong, since the Lord himself rejects the philosophy of one Atma. And then there are, he quotes from the Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 28th chapter, where Lord Kapila compares the famous example of the fire and the sparks of fire, as the relationship between the Lord and the Jiva. And then he quotes from Brihat Arankya Upanishad that Sarvani Bhutani Vyucharanti. Same analogy, small sparks arise from fire, all living entities arise from the Supreme Lord. And then from the Smriti, from Vishnu Puran, saying that fire is situated in one place but distributes heat and light. Similarly, the personality of Godhead is distributing his energies in different ways. So, Prabhupada in the purport, he summarizes 6 differences between the soul and the super soul. So one he says is, and these are obviously similar to the one that Chakravarti summarizes. So one he says is that the personality of God is alipta, uncontaminated by external energy. However, the soul is lipta, which means that when it comes in contact with material nature, it forgets his real entity. And so point is that the second point is that so the first point is that the Lord is infallible and the Jiva is fallible. Second point he makes is the Supreme Lord never forgets his identity, while the Jiva could forget, similar to the fallible part. Third is, he says that for the Supreme Lord, there is no difference between the body and the soul. He is completely soul. He has no material body. The conditioned soul has a soul distinct from the body. Fourth is that the super soul is devoid of designation, whereas the conditioned soul is designated by his particular type of body. So when Prabhupada says devoid of designation, he is not saying that the super soul is impersonal, but he is devoid of any material designation. The super soul is always Krishna. Whether the super soul is in the body of a deva or a human or a asura, he is always Krishna. Right? So the designation never changes. It's devoid of any material designation. He has an eternal spiritual designation. But the jiva, he takes a designation based on the body. The fifth is, and this Prabhupada quotes based on the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that both the jiva and the super soul are kshetragya, but the kshetra is different. For the super soul, the kshetra is the entire creation. For the jiva, the kshetra is his own body. The kshetragya part, the jiva is only conscious of his own body, the super soul is conscious of everything. And the final difference is that the super soul exists in all bodies, and the jiva exists only in his body. So verses like these, where these more complex philosophical bases are being presented, or so this is essentially, as I said, Achinta Bheda Tattva, right? Between relationship between the Lord and the soul. And these are the verses that are also exploited by the impersonalists or the Mayavadis. And even the Mayavadis are not like united. Even they have different flavors. Like there is a Pratibimba flavor. So Pratibimba is the reflection of the sun in the pot. There is one sun and there are hundreds of pots, and the sun is getting reflected in all the pots. So the Vaishnava understanding is that even though the sun is being reflected in hundreds of pots, there is one original sun. The Mayavadis, they do not look at the original sun. They only look at the reflection of the sun in the pots, and they essentially say that the Brahman is dispersed through media by Maya. So that's the Pratibimbavad. Then there is the Parichedavad. Parichedavad is the postulate that Pariched means to divide. So Maya divides Brahman. And by the influence of Maya, Brahman gets divided. Portions of the Brahman become Jivas, which are essentially Pariched Brahman that's been divided. And then just like when there is a pot and it's broken and the air goes back and merges into the surrounding air, when the Jiva is liberated, it emerges back. And then there is the Ekatmavad. Ekatmavad is, there is only one absolute self. There are some nuances, I don't know the full details, but this look like they are similar, but there are some nuances in the difference. Prabhupada comments that Mahaprabhu says that Mayavadi Bhashya Shunile Haya Sarvanash. That if one follows the instruction of Mayavadi philosophers and believes that the personality of Godhead and individual soul are one, his understanding of real philosophy is forever doomed. So the Mayavadis follow what is known as Mahavakya. Right? Mahavakya is that the scriptures, there are statements that talk about the oneness of the Jiva with the Lord. And then there are statements that talk about the difference between the Jiva and the Lord. So they consider the statements that talk about the oneness as Mahavakya. And the ones that talk about the difference as Lagu Vakya. They say that these statements are Vyavarika. They're just conventional statements that they're made to encourage people, they're made to give some solace, but they're Lagu Vakya. You can ignore them. So the approach is like, analogy is that supposing somebody says that Ramesh does not eat in the daytime. One sentence, one statement, and Ramesh's weight is increasing. The second sentence. So when the Vaishnavas look at these two statements, so they will look at these two statements and they will draw the conclusion that it means that Ramesh is eating at night. He doesn't eat during day, his weight is increasing. So it means that he is eating during night. So when the Mayavadis will look at it, they will say that Ramesh's weight is increasing is a Lagu Vakya. You can neglect that statement. It's a wrong statement. Or the perception of the statement is wrong. The statement to be accepted is that Ramesh does not eat in the daytime. Right? So they basically chop off one part of the statements and they accept another part of it. So similarly, when the Vedas talk about the oneness of the Lord and the Jiva and the differences, the Vaishnavas, they reconcile it by saying that the oneness is qualitative and the difference is quantitative. Now, the Mayavadis, they reject the statements that talk about the difference and they only talk about, except the statements about oneness, and they call them as Mahavakyas. Right? So depending on who here, there are 4 Mahavakyas, 5. So Prabhupada quotes some of the Mahavakyas in his purports and his lectures, like Tat Tvamasi, that you are, and Aham Brahmasmi, then Prajanam Brahma, Ayam Atma Brahma. Ayam Atma Brahma means that the self is Brahman. Soham means I am he, I am the Lord. Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya, Prabhupada will quote this often, that only the Brahman is true, everything else is false. The Vaishnavas say that the material world is also true but temporary. It's not false. Or they'll say Sarvam Khalva Idam Brahma, that there is only, everything is only Brahman. The Vaishnavas say that is true. Even the Jiva is Brahman in the sense that it's a spirit soul, but distinct Brahman from the original Brahman. Okay, moving on to verse 64. Evam samanaso hamsho hamsena pratiboditaha swasthastad vicharena nashtama punaha smritim. In this way, both swans live together in the heart. When the one swan is instructed by the other, he is situated in his constitutional position. This means he regains his original Krishna consciousness, which was lost because of his material attraction. Now, this is the summary of the allegorical story that Narad has been telling to Puranjan. So, swastha literally means healthy, but here it means a jiva who is now spiritually healthy, not covered by Prakriti. He now has regained his memory, which he had earlier on lost because of the aversion to the Lord. So Chakravarti Pad says that that what the jiva had previously attained by his devotion to the Guru, now that has been strengthened by the instructions of the Paramatma. Right? So this is just the lining up of the concept that the words of the Guru are the same as the words of the Lord. So Chakravarti continues saying that by the discussion of non-difference and by the greater strength of the Shruti concerning the two birds, one should understand that the highest goal, according to Narad, is attaining the position of prema as an associate of the Lord. And so this verse essentially talks about that both the swans live together in the heart. One swan is instructed by the other. So that position is clearly established. That Lord is superior, the jiva is inferior. What does this mean? That he regains his original Krishna consciousness. So he develops once again his service attitude to the Lord, and then he loses his material attraction. Prabhupada also comments that the analogy of the swan is up because the swan is white. And he says the white indicates the purity of the consciousness. The Lord, of course, is supremely pure, but when the jiva also becomes a swan along with the Lord, his consciousness is also purified. Prabhupada said the word tad vibhicharena. So tad vibhicharena means by being separated from the super soul. He says this is also significant because it indicates that when one is separated from God due to disobedience, his real sense is lost. Then by the grace of Krishna and Guru, he can properly be situated in the liberated position. These verses spoken by Narad Muni, and his purpose in speaking them is to revive our consciousness. Although the living entity and the super soul are one in quality, the individual soul has to pursue the instruction of the super soul. That is the state of liberation. Okay, verse 65. Varishmane tadadhyatmam parokshena pradarshitam yat paroksha priyo devo Bhagwan Vishwabhavanaha. Prem Kishore Prabhu, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, I think he's having technical problems. Saran Prabhu, maybe you can.
Yeah. My dear King, Krishna Bharishi, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, is celebrated to be known indirectly. Thus, I have described the story of Puranjana to you. Actually, it is an instruction for yourself.
For your self-realization.
Preservation.
This is the last verse in the chapter, and this is the conclusion of the allegorical story by Narad Muni. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that Narad Muni is indicating that they should not take this simply as a story. So on the pretext of telling the story about a king, this is Paryokshana, Narad Muni is saying that I have given spiritual instruction. Right, and one of the reasons that is given over here is that the Lord himself is fond of indirect expression. And so one of the names of the devotee is Kavya. Kavya means expert. Kavya also means poetic. So the nature of poets is that they all often speak through analogies or similes or metaphors or allegories, because the Lord likes it. And even the Lord does that himself. So Chakravarti Pad says that Narad Muni says one of the reasons I've told the story in this way is because the Lord likes speaking in this way. But then he cautions. He says, even though I've spoken it as a story, don't take it just as a story. Understand the purport of the story. Prabhupada says that in the Puranas, there are many similar stories for self-realization. As stated in the Vedas, Paroksha Priya Iva Hi Deva. There are many stories in the Puranas that are intended to interest ordinary men in transcendental subjects, but actually they refer to real facts. They are not to be considered stories without a transcendental purpose. So one category is allegorical stories like this, or like saying that two birds sitting on a branch. So these are allegories. Now, Prabhupada says the other thing is that there are also historical facts that are presented. Now, one should not just consider them as historical facts. They are much more than that. That behind every fact every pastime that is presented, there is an instruction, often a set of instructions to understand. So, one should not only skim the surface. That there are people who watch the Mahabharata or read it, and it's an absorbing storyline, right? So they read it, they enjoy it, they may get some sukriti out of it, but that's it. But in the Mahabharata, there is the Bhagavad Gita, and there are so many instructions that come through in conversation between great personalities, through the activities of the great personalities, Krishna favoring the Pandavas over the Kauravas, Krishna apparently cheating on the battlefield, the conduct of the Pandavas during Yuddha Krida. So each of these incidents have an instruction. The Prabhupada is saying that one should carefully read it from that perspective also. And at one point he said, it's like a fisherman, in order to attract a fish, he drops a hook with a worm on it. And the fish comes and it's attracted to the worm, but it gets caught by the hook. So the Puranas, they have these attractive stories, and people who are materialistic, they get attracted to the story. But the real reason is that once they start getting attracted to the stories, then they also start inquiring into the meaning. And then they are more strongly engaged with the spirituals. So just dry philosophy is difficult for people to take, especially if they're not initially inclined towards it. In the 11th canto, and the Navagendras, they're instructing Maharaj Nimi, and they say this was a Parokshavad Vedoyam Bala Nam Anu Shashanam Karma Mokshaya Karmani Vidyate Hayagdam Yatha. Children and foolish people are attracted to materialistic, fruitive activities, although the actual goal of life is to become free from such activities. Therefore, the Vedic injunctions indirectly lead one to the path of ultimate liberation by first prescribing fruitive religious activities, just as the father promises his child candy so that the child will take his medicine. Okay, so that is the end of the 28th chapter. And I can pause here and see if you have any discussion on what we discussed now or previously.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I was one appreciation, one example that really struck me was that Ramesh and that sentence. It really summed up those two verses, so that was really nice. I think I don't have a clear understanding of which is contaminated and which is not contaminated, the reflection in the mirror or the reflection in the eye. And you gave it a little nuanced explanation, but I somehow didn't understand that fully. If you could share it.
Sure. So the difference is that when one looks into the mirror, one gets a clear reflection of oneself. And if I were to look into the eyes of somebody, then the eyes are basically convex, so we get a distorted reflection. So it is used to distinguish between a liberated jiva and a conditioned jiva. That a liberated jiva has a clear understanding of his identity, but the conditioned jiva does not. It is also used to indicate the difference between the Paramatma and the jiva. That the Paramatma will always have a clear understanding of his identity, he can never get contaminated, but the conditioned jiva can get contaminated. Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
Just a thought, Prabhu. So far, it's very interesting analogies. And all these, Narad Muni is really, to come up with all these analogies is not easy, first of all. And then also, it's very interesting to see how Vidarbhi at the end of the day become realized, and then, it's all by the spiritual master. In this, we say we surrender to the spiritual master. The spiritual master was his husband. And then, but the last part of the realization come from Paramatma. Is that right?
That is correct. That's how the story progresses. That
because that means that the last part of the realization, the Paramatma is the Chetra Guru, is a Guru at the end of the day.
That is correct. When the jiva becomes purified enough, then as Prabhupada Maharaj says that he's able to tune into the Paramatma channel. The Paramatma has always been speaking. But like if you have a radio and you're not tuned into that station, you will not be able to hear. It does not mean that that station does not exist. That station exists and there has been transmission going on. But if you're not tuned, you won't hear. So when the jiva becomes purified, the Paramatma has always been giving instructions. But now the jiva is able to listen to those instructions. He becomes aware of the presence and the desires of the Paramatma, and he begins to serve. So that indicates the purified stage.
Okay, meaning that the Guru make the disciple learn how to tune in the channel of the Paramatma.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nicely put.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Prabhu, can we also say that this is that Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Vijay? It kind of talks about that.
Yes.
Like we hear, right, by the Guru's mercy, you get Krishna, and by Krishna's mercy, you get Guru. Actually, that previous, it's the other way around. That's the first step, is what we hear.
That
by
is true.
Krishna's mercy, we get Guru, and by Guru's mercy, we
We
get
get
Krishna.
Krishna. Yeah. And this is one of the themes in Prabhupada's purport in this section of the chapter of the non-difference between the Guru and the personality of Godhead. Because Prabhupada makes this point that they are non-different because they are identical in their purpose and their mission. The Lord wants you to go back to Godhead. The Guru wants you to go back to Godhead. Whatever the Lord wants of you, the Guru wants of you. And vice versa. Whatever the Guru wants, the Lord wants. So that's where Prabhupada makes this point, that they are considered to be non-different. So by the Guru's mercy, one gets access to the Lord, and by the Lord's mercy, one gets access to the Guru.
Prabhu, I have one more question. I'm sure I've written it, but I can't. So you mentioned there are 5 points that Vishwanath Chakravarti says. The third one, you says that the super soul enters the body by his will. But before that, in the second point, you said something and I didn't write it down. Was it contamination?
Did you get the points that Prabhupada makes, the 6 points?
Yeah, I've written those.
So all of them, they are subset. Prabhupada expands on it a little bit. They're all subset of that. I may have spoken a little differently. Okay, so if we don't have any further discussion, then we can move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 29, Canto 4, talks between Narad and King Prachinabadi. So the allegorical story has ended. Now Narad Muni is going to explain the allegory. So just a point of trivia, that this chapter is the longest chapter in Bhagavatam. It has 85 verses in it. And actually, the 2 longest chapters in the Bhagavatam are both in the 4th canto. There's this chapter, and the other chapter is in the Dhruv Leela. So it's either, I think it's the Dhruv and Narad conversation. Narad Muni instructing Dhruva. That's, I believe, 81 verses, 82 verses. So this is a long chapter, and it packs a lot of information in it. the first part of the chapter, the first 25 verses, they're essentially Narad Muni elaborating on the allegory. Right. So in 25 verses, he speaks about what did this mean. Right. Now, when we go through these verses, what we'll realize is that Narad Muni is not going to expand on the allegorical story. So if you look at the allegory, there are characters in there that are interacting with one another. There is Puranjan, there is Puranjani, there is the city of 9 gates, there is the serpent with 5 heads, there is Panchal Desh. So there are basically different props or characters. Then there is a storyline that Puranjan got attracted to Puranjani, and then he married her. He moved into the city of 9 gates. He was living there happily. Then he goes to hunt. His wife gets angry. He appeases her, and then he enjoys with her. And then Chandvik comes and attacks him, and Kalkanya comes and embraces. So there is a storyline that's going on. Narad Muni is not going to explain the storyline because his expectation is that Prachina Bharishad is intelligent enough to understand. He will explain the symbolism. That Puranjan is the Jiva, Puranjani is material intelligence, Chandvik is Kal or time. So he'll explain the different symbols, and I'm not sure if he does it extensively because he'll explain the main ones, right? Like there is the verse in which there is the chariot of Puranjan described. He does not describe the chariot. Narad doesn't describe the chariot. But the whole chariot is one big chariot of metaphors. The horse is this, and the wheel is this, and the reins are this. Narad does not explain that. He explains the main symbolism, and then he leaves it at that. So essentially, he's in case of Prachina Bari, he's expecting Prachina Bari to fill in the blanks. In our cases, he is expecting that the mercy of Sadhu and Guru will come and explain. And that's what happens by the mercy of Prabhupada, by the mercy of other acharyas like Vishwanath Chakravarti. These analogies are explained. So after elaborating on the analogy, then Narad Muni begins to give direct instructions to Prachina Bari. Right? So he gives him a direct description of the material world, the suffering in the material world. Then he presents bhakti as a solution. Right? So far he's explaining to Prachina Bari the state of affairs. This is the material world, and this is how you can get out of it. Then now he instructs Prachina Bari that you stop these rituals right away, this killing of animals. Then Prachina Bari further questions Narad Muni, and Narad Muni will talk about the transmigration of soul. And the chapter ends with the renunciation of Prachina Bari, and then the falshruti of listening to this whole conversation between Narad Muni and Prachina Bari. Okay, so we'll start with the first verse. Prachina Bari Ruvacha Bhagvamste Vacho Shambi Smabhi Na Samyag Avagamyate Kavyastad Vijananti Na Vayam Karma Mohitaha.
King Prachina Bari replied, "My dear Lord, we could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegory story of King Puranjana. Actually, those who are perfect in spiritual knowledge can understand, but for us who are overly attached to fruitive activities, to realize the purpose of your story is very difficult.
So this was always the goal of Narad Muni, right? So we see that when he first talked to Prachinabhari, he provoked him by asking a question. So this is right at the beginning of the 25th chapter. Right? He says that what do you desire to achieve by performing these fruitive activities? Right? That's the opening gambit, the first question that Narad asks Prachinabhari. And Prachinabhari at that time, he gives a reply that is very similar to this verse. Right here he's saying that because my intelligence is materially clouded, I'm not able to give you the answer to your question. Now he's saying the same thing, that because my intelligence is materially clouded, I'm not able to understand the allegory behind your story. But Narad Muni, after the first conversation, when Narad Muni asked Prachinabhari, what do you desire to achieve by these fruitive activities? And Prachinabhari said that I don't know how to answer the question. So what does Narad Muni do? He scares Prachinabhari. And he says, you look into the sky. And by his mystic power, all the animals that had been sacrificed in the yoga without the proper performance, he said, look, they are waiting for you. And they're waiting for you to die, so that by their horns and by their teeth, they will tear you down and eat you, right? So he instills fear. So Narad Muni has instilled two powerful emotions in Prachinabhari: curiosity and concern. First is that I don't know why I'm performing Karam Kanda. You tell me. And concern that I'm going to be devoured by these animals. In response to this curiosity and concern, Narad Muni then he proceeds to narrate the tale of Puranjan, right? And which he concludes by saying that actually this is an instruction of self-realization, right? 65th verse, previous chapter. He said actually this is an instruction for self-realization. So Prachinabhari is now once again confessing that he is unable to fully understand the purport of the allegory. The difference between the two Prachinabharis is that while he has not been able to fully understand, but while hearing the allegorical story, both his curiosity and concerns have deepened. So in the story, Narad Muni at one point reveals that actually your Prachinabhari says that you are Puranjan. And Prachinabhari is intelligent enough to understand right from the beginning that the story is an allegorical story based on him. Right? So when he's seeing the trials and tribulation of Puranjan, his concerns are deepening. And when he's seeing the liberation of Vaidarbhi, when he's seeing the journey of Puranjan, his curiosity, his inquisitiveness is increasing. How can I also achieve that state? So this is essentially how preachers work, right? The first thing they do is they connect with the person and open up the heart of the person. How do they do? They do by inspiring these two emotions, curiosity and concern. So when you do book distribution, very rarely you'll go to a person and say, take this book about Krishna, read it, your life will be perfect. Right? So generally what we were trained to do was to, when we approach them, we would say that, have you heard about yoga? And they would say, yeah, I heard about it. What do you think about yoga? Yoga is exercise, you do it to get better health. But do you know there is more to yoga than physical health? You can get mental health. Yeah, I heard about it by breathing. But there is more than that also. You know what yoga means? So it's basically churning the curiosity. And then also talking about concern. Like, have you seen real happiness in this life? This book will give you answers to both, about where real happiness can be found and how you can practice yoga for eternal peace. So Narad Muni, of course, is the perfect preacher, and he is demonstrating that technique also, right? So he first connected with Puranjan. Now, I'm concerned about you. I'm your well-wisher. And my concern is that this is what is going to happen to you. Then he preaches to him indirectly, right? He does not say, Puranjan, you're a rascal, you're Prachinabari, you're a rascal, you're going to hell. He gives him a glimpse, but closes that, right? And he tells us entertaining story. So people are, if you attack the existence of a person, the person becomes very defensive, right? You go to a person on the street and say, you're eating meat, so you go to hell. It's not going to help the subsequent conversation, right? The person will say, okay, see you in hell, and walk away. But if you go to the person and then say that, are you concerned about the environment? Yes. Would you like to lead a healthy life? Yes. Do you know what is the biggest cause of diseases? What? So there is this this connection made, and then you talk about a third person, that these people, they are doing fill in the blank, right? These people who run the slaughterhouses, they are killing 20,000 cows every day, and they're suffering so much. And these people are doing this, and the person is along with you saying that, yeah, those persons, they're still not connecting that they are the cause of that, right? Because it is indirect. People don't have a hard time either criticizing other people or participating in the criticism. But then at some point, you bring the connection back, right? That the reason these slaughterhouses are running, because there are people like you who are eating. But by that time, the person's heart is still open because of the previous interaction. So now we see that after that Narad Muni has sufficiently attracted Prachinabari, he will begin to explain the allegory. Prabhupada writes in the purport that the chapter describes, the 29th chapter describes that by too much attachment for women, one becomes a woman in the next life, but a person who associates with the personality of Godhead or his representative becomes free from all material attachments and is thus liberated. So essentially the chapter is direct instructions on the path of bhakti leading to liberation. Verse 2. Narad Uvacha Purusham Purunjanam Vidya Yadvyanti Atmanaha Puram Ekadvitri Chatushpadam Bahupadam Apadakam.
The great sage Narada Muni continued. You must understand that Puranjana, the living entity, transmigrates according to his own work into different types of bodies, which may be one-legged, two-legged, three-legged, four-legged, many-legged, or simply legless. Transmigrating into these various types of bodies, the living entity, as the so-called enjoyer, is known as Puranjana.
So the first and the most prominent character is explained by Narad Muni, that the living entity is Puranjan. Puranjan represents the conditioned jiva. And Prabhupada in the purport, he writes that what is the different number of legs, what kind of entities? He says that one leg refers to the ghosts, because the ghosts walk on one leg. Now, honestly speaking, I did not know this, but Prabhupada is saying it must be true that the ghosts only walk on one leg. Then Dvipar are human beings. They walk on two-leg. And Tripad is essentially a old human being. Prabhupada said when the person is old, then he walks with the help of a stick. So that is, at that point, it becomes a Tripad. Chatushpad is quadrupeds. They are animals like dogs and cows, etc. Bahupad are like centipedes and scorpions and insects that have many legs. Could have as many as 10 legs, 100 legs, 1,000 legs. Then apad, they are snakes who have essentially, they crawl on their belly. They don't have a leg. So the name Purajan indicates one who enjoys possessing different types of bodies. His mentality for enjoyment in the material world is accommodated by different types of bodies. So Narad Muni, in addition to explaining that Puranjan is the conditioned jiva, he is also introducing the topic of transmigration. Right? That's why he's saying that he has many different kinds of bodies. So he's sowing that seed with Prachina Bari, and Prachina Bari will ask about this later on. And one section of the chapter is actually dedicated to elaborating on transmigration. Okay, verse 3. Yo vigyatha satasya purushasya sakeshwaraha yanna vigyayate pumbhi nama birva kriya gunaha.
The person I have described as unknown is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master and eternal friend of the living entity. Since the living entities cannot realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by material names, activities, or qualities, he remains everlastingly unknown to the conditions too.
So the second analogy is explained over here, second metaphor, that avigyata is Paramatma, right? It's a person I've described as unknown. This is avigyat. He says he is Paramatma. Prabhupada gives some references on how the Supreme Lord becomes unknown. And he says he is referred to as Nirakar, Avigyat, or Avan Manas Gochar. So his form, name, quality, pastimes, or paraphernalia cannot be perceived by material senses. That is why he is known as Adhokshaja, beyond sense perception. He is also known as Nirakar because his akar cannot be ascertained by materialistic person. He is called Avigyata because he is only known through the scriptures. And Prabhupada said in this verse, it is said, Pumbir Nabir va Kriya Guna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has many names, qualities, although none of them are material. So the Lord as Avigyat or Nirakar or Avan Manasagochara or Adhoksaja is how he is presented to, he presents himself to the non-devotees. So then Prabhupada says that only the devotees know Krishna. Right? Bhakti Amam Abhijanati Yavanyas Chashmi Tattvata, goes from Bhagavad Gita. Right? So it's not that the super soul is eternally avigyat. He's avigyat to the materialistic, but to the spiritual, to the devotees, he presents himself. So why does he present himself to the devotees? What do the devotees do? So by seeing the service attitude in the devotees, the Lord will reveal himself to them. How does he reveal himself? In the form that is described in the Brahma Samhita as Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. Vigraha means with the form that is eternally spiritual and full of bliss and knowledge. So Prabhupada quotes the verse, Aptasa Krishna Namadi na bhavedgraha indriya siva mukhaye jivadu swayameva sprutatya. That one cannot see the Lord by material senses. He is avigyat, but by senses that have been spiritualized by service, the Lord can be seen. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur in his book Bhakti Vaibhava, he talks about different types of deviant philosophies. One of the deviation is commingling the names of the Lord with that of the humans and the devas. Right? So they believe that since the impersonal truth since the absolute truth is impersonal, then even though it is manifesting itself in many forms, they're all the same. So chanting any name is the same. So this is one of the deviations. Whether you chant Krishna or Ram or Durga or Om, they're all the same. Other kind of deviant philosophies is that they say that it is actually a sin to give the Lord a name. So they don't even accept that the Lord can be named. Lord of the Brahman can be named. So Prabhupada says about them that because they cannot understand the actual name of the personality of Godhead, they take it for granted that any name can be accepted. They believe that since the absolute truth is impersonal, they can call him by any name, otherwise they maintain he has no name. This is not a fact. Here it is clearly stated, Na Amabhir va Kriya Guna, that the Lord has specific names such as Ram, Krishna, Govinda, Narayan, Vishnu, and Adhok Saja. There are indeed many names, but the conditioned soul cannot understand them. Yeah. Verse 4. Yajajid Krishan Purusha Kartasnyena Prakritir Guna Navadvaram Dvihastangari Tatramanu Tasadveti.
When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands and 2 legs. Thus he prefers to become a human being or a demigod.
So this verse is explaining the metaphor of the city of 9 gates. And so it was mentioned that Puranjan was looking around searching for a place, and then finally he finds this beautiful place. So Nad Muni is explaining what does it represent? That when the jiva is transmigrating, then he may take on many forms based on the modes of the material nature. But the form that he prefers is the Manushya Rupa. Whether it is that of a human being or a demigod. Then Prabhupada also talks briefly about the reason that the original spirit soul is forced to accept a material body. And so he says that he accepts a material body by virtue of his own desires. And because the person is continuously driven by these desires, he is continuously born into the duality of delusion. Ichha dvesha samuttena. That all the living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. Right? So the impetus for the jiva taking a body is this duality. And that's why as soon as he takes on a body, this duality becomes manifest. It's not that because he takes a body, he gets anchored in any kind of duality. The duality is the one that is forcing him to take this body. And that's why right from the beginning it is manifest. And Prabhupada says that also from this verse we can understand that the living entity first accepts a body that is human in form, but gradually due to his degraded life, he falls into lower forms of life like animal, plant, and aquatic. So Prabhupada is talking about it. Now, the human form does not only mean like the human form on the earth planet. At other places, or at least one other place, not sure how many. Prabhupada says that when the jiva falls, he first becomes Brahma. And then he falls further from there. Prabhupada, in his purport, he also refers to this verse. He does not quote it, but it's a reference to the verse from Bhagavatam 11th canto, 5th chapter, verse 11, where it said that that in the material world, the conditioned soul is always inclined to sex, meat eating, and intoxication. Therefore, religious scriptures never actually encourage such activities. Although the scriptural injunctions provide for sex through sacred marriage, for meat eating through sacrificial offerings, and for intoxication through the acceptance of ritual cups of wine, such ceremonies are meant for the ultimate purpose of renunciation. And then Prabhupada continues that the more one desires a degraded life, the more one falls into abominable existence. And then he explains why is the human form better. So not only is the human form better for because one can make spiritual advancement, but Prabhupada says that in the animal form, the nature is that they can enjoy one particular sense strongly. But in the human form of life, all the senses can be enjoyed. Only in the human form of life, this capability is there. That's why the jiva, so when the jiva is navigating itself towards the human form of life, not really because they want to make spiritual advancements, because they're conditioned at that time. The main focus is how to maximize my material enjoyment. So then the human form of life presents itself as one where the capability to enjoy materially is the highest. So that's why they gravitate towards that form. And Prabhupada concludes that unless one is properly trained, he becomes a victim of the modes of material nature. Prakriti Krama. Okay, verse 5. Buddhim tu pramadam vidya mammaham miti yat kritam yamadhistaya dehasmin uman bhungte kshabhi gunan.
The great sage Narada continued. The word pramada mentioned in this regard refers to material intelligence or ignorance. It is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body. Influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he begins to enjoy and suffer through the senses. Thus, the living entity is entrapped.
So this is a explanation of Puranjani. So at one place she was actually introduced as Pramadaya, one who gives pramad. Here it's pramad that it's referring to, that Puranjani refers to material intelligence. And in the material existence, the so-called intelligence is actually considered to be ignorance. So, so we see that in this word, pramada is proper translated as Puranjani or young woman. The Sanskrit word means illusion. So, in the material existence, what is the biggest illusion? The biggest illusion is that the living entity falsely claims things to be his. The sense of ownership. That is the biggest illusion. So he thinks that I am the monarch of all I serve. And this is ignorance because nothing belongs to him. Ishavasya Vidam Sarvam, everything actually belongs to the Lord. So even the body and the senses, which the Jiva is so intimately connected to, that he does not even bother to make a statement. That most of the people will not say that this is my body. They just take it for granted that I am the body. Right? But even that has been given by the Lord. The senses are so subtle that most of the jivas will not even separate themselves from the senses. I see, I smell, I do. But even those senses are given by the Lord. So in the 5th canto, Rishabdev states that Janasya mohoyam aham mameti. So this aham mameti, this aham means I and mameti means mind. So this aham mameti originates from the sexual attraction between man and woman. Pumshastriya mithuni bhava. Which is another way of saying that the basis of the material world is lust. Now, it is strongly expressed in the attraction between a man and a woman, but it is also pervasive in everything else. So the lust is also that this is my child, this is my house, this is my upadhi, right? So that's how it permeates everything. And Prabhupada says that Mahaprabhu has given us the solution of how to purify this contaminated intelligence. This is essentially the first verse of Shashtakam, Chetodapan Marjanam, that when it is polished by the chanting of the holy name, then one sees that I own nothing and everything that I have actually belongs to Krishna and nothing belongs to me. In verse 6, Sakhaya Indriya Gana Jnanam Karma Chayat Kritam Sakyasta Vrita Prana Panchavriti Yathoragaha.
The 5 working senses and the 5 senses that acquire knowledge are all male friends of Puranjani. The living entity is assisted by these senses in acquiring knowledge and engaging in activity. The engagements of the senses are known as girlfriends, and the serpent, which is described as having 5 heads, is the life air acting within the 5 circulatory processes.
So this is explaining that, so when Puranjani first came in front of Puranjan, then she had 10 associates with her. And these are essentially the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. Then each of the servants of Puranjan, each of these 10, they had innumerable women following them. And essentially these are the many engagements of the senses. Right? So the engagements of the senses are known as girlfriends, as the girlfriend, Sakya. There. And then the snake, the 5-headed snake, is essentially the life wares. So, Prabhupada, once again, so most of the commentary that Prabhupada gives on this expansion of the metaphors, he also gave it when the metaphors were first presented. Because Prabhupada was talking about the external storyline also. So Prabhupada is basically once again emphasizing for the sake of these things sitting deep in our heart. So this Prabhupada says that essentially because sometimes people act very sinfully, then they don't even get a material body. So, driven by the desire to enjoy, the soul gets various types of body with a collection of senses. But when that becomes excessive, when the person becomes excessively attached, then he does not even get a material body. Prabhupada said this is ghostly life, that it hovers on the subtle platform and the person suffers a lot. Then Prabhupada also explains that why are the life hairs compared to the five-headed serpent. So he said the living entities are merged into the air of life, which act in different ways of circulation. Prana, Apan, Udan, Vyan, Saman. And because the life air functions in this five-fold way, it is compared to the five-hooded snake. So this is why the five hoods are there, because there are five kinds of life air. Then Prabhupada says that the soul passes through the Kundalini chakra like a serpent crawling on the ground. The life air is compared to Uraga, the serpent. So that's why the serpent, because the life air is enmeshed in the Kundalini chakra. The Kundalini chakra, my understanding, is the one at the base of the spine. It is the one that is the chakra that kind of is the foundation for all the other chakras. So the soul of the jiva passes through the Kundalini chakra like a serpent crawling on the ground. So essentially, we know what the life hairs do, that they connect the soul with the body. That's why they say that when a person dies, they say that the person has the pran tyag. So the pran is referring not to the soul but to the life hairs. That when those life hairs break, then the subtle body and the spiritual body, they leave the material body. Then Panchavriti is a desire to satisfy the senses that is attracted by the five sense objects, namely form, taste, sound, smell, and touch. Okay, verse 7. Brahad balam manovidya ubhayendriya nayakam panchal pancha vishaya yanmadhya navakham puram.
The 11th attendant, who is the commander of the others, is known as the mind. He is the leader of the senses, both in the acquisition of knowledge and in the performance of work. The Panchala kingdom is that atmosphere in which the five sense objects are enjoyed. Within that Panchala kingdom is the city of the body, which has 9 gates.
So here, Nad Muni is explaining that the 11th attendant, who was the commander, is the mind, and Panchal is essentially representing the material world, within which the body, the city of 9 gates is, the samsara, within which the body is existing. Prabhupada has a wonderful purport on this. He says that the mind is the center of all activities and is described here as Brahad Bal, very powerful. To get out of the clutches of Maya, one has to control his mind. According to training, the mind is friend and enemy of the living entity. And then Prabhupada explains with an example that if one gets a good manager, then his estate is nicely managed. If the manager is a thief, the estate is spoiled. Similarly, in this material condition existence, the living entity gives the power of attorney to his mind. As such, he is liable to be misdirected by his mind into enjoying the sense objects. Amrish Maharaj therefore first engaged his mind upon the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Mana Krishna Padaravinda. When the mind is engaged in the meditation, the senses are controlled. The system of control is known as yam, subduing of the senses. One who can subdue the senses is called Goswami, one who cannot is Kodas. Okay, verse 8. Akshini na shike karnau mukham shishna gudaviti dve dve dvarau bahiryati yastad indriya samyutaha.
The eyes, nostrils, and ears are pairs of gates situated in one place. The mouth genitals, and rectum are also different gates. Being placed into a body having these 9 gates, the living entity acts externally in the material world and enjoys sense objects like form and taste.
So this is an elaboration on what are the 9 gates of the material body, and this Nag Muni will cover in the subsequent verses. So he also talks about, so in the story, Nag Muni mentioned that how Puranjan used to go through different gates accompanied by different people to different places and enjoy. Right. So he explains over here that the living entity acts externally in the material world and enjoys sense objects like form and taste. So that's the explanation of that. The Puranjan going that through, he would go through a place with a friend, through a gate with a friend to a place and enjoy there, right? Essentially, it means that through a sense with the Tanmatra, he would engage with the object of the senses and enjoy various sense objects. Okay, verse 9. So we'll do, yeah, I mean, these verses have almost no purport. We'll do maybe 2 more verses and then 3 more verses, then we'll stop. Okay, let's continue. Akshinina Sikeyashim iti panchapurah kritah dakshinaha karna utrachotrah smutah paschimetyadhau dvaro gudam shishinam nihochate.
2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth, altogether 5, are situated in the front. The right ear is accepted as the southern gate, and the left ear is the northern gate. The 2 holes or gates situated in the west are known as the rectum and genital organ.
So Nag Muni is explaining what do the gates, how do the gates correspond to the senses. And Prabhupada says that that the eastern gate is more important because the east direction is auspicious. The sun rises from the east. So there are 3 gates in the eastern direction, and these are essentially the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Actually, there are 5 gates: 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth. And Prabhupada said these are very important for the body. Okay, verse 10. Khadyota virmukhi chatra netriketra nirmiti rupam vibrajitam tabhyam vichaste chakshusheshwaraha.
The 2 gates named Padyota and Avirmukhi, which have been spoken of, are the 2 eyes side by side in one place. The town named Vibhrajita should be understood as form. In this way, the 2 eyes are always engaged in seeing different kinds of forms.
So this is an explanation of Puranjan leaving through a particular gate and going to another place to enjoy, right? So Khadyota and Avirmukhi are the 2 eyes, and he would go to Vibrajita, and Vibrajita is form. So this is how the sense enjoyed with how the jiva used the sense to enjoy with the sense object. Nagami does not talk about the friend. So he was accompanied by a friend. The friend is essentially the ability to see. So the jiva, using the eyes, exercises the ability to see and engages with the sense object. Prabhupada says the 2 eyes of the living entity are attracted by bright and beautiful forms. Then they become entangled in this form, and exactly as the insect becomes attracted to fire. Okay, we'll do one last verse and then stop after that, verse 11. Nalini nalini nase gandha saura buchyate Grahano vadudut mukhyasam vipno va grasavidrasaha.
The two doors named Nalini and Nalini should be known as the two nostrils, and the city named Saurabha represents aroma. The companion spoken as Avaduta is the sense of smell. The door called Mukhya is the mouth, and Vipana is the faculty of speech. The Sagna is the sense of taste.
Okay, so again, we have done these that are being explained here. And here Nand Muni is also talking about the companion, the Avadut. So Prabhupada says Avadut means most free. Person who is not under rules and regulations of any injunctions. Right? In the spiritual concept, Avadut means that one who has purified himself to the point that he does not have to submit to the rules and regulations of Sadhana Vedi Bhakti. And can also mean by basically a person who is, in another context, very sinful. That a person does not follow any religious injunctions and basically acts whimsically. So Prabhupada said, Avadut stage is exactly like air which does not care for any obstruction. Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, Chanchalami Mana Krishna. The mind is restless, turbulent, and obstinate, and very strong. And controlling is more difficult than controlling the wind. Just as the air or the wind cannot be checked, the two nostrils situated in one place enjoy the sense of smell without impediment. When the tongue is present, the mouth continuously tastes all kinds of relishable foodstuffs. Okay, so we'll pause here and see if there is any comments or discussion. Okay, if not, then we'll end for the day and continue next week. Vanchakalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anant Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nithai Gaur Premanandi. Hare Krishna. Thank you.